Hi, welcome to Revolutionary Virginia. This is a presentation I gave at Belgrove Plantation in the Shenandoah Valley. Belgrove was the home of Isaac Height, who was an officer in the Virginia Continental Line. He was an aide-de-camp to General Peter Muhlenberg. He was also the grandson of Yost Height, who was the leader of the first large group of Pennsylvania Germans to come down the Great Wagon Road and settle in the Shenandoah Valley in the 1730s. Another of Yost Height's grandsons was Abraham Bowman, who was the second colonel of the 8th Virginia Regiment, succeeding Peter Muhlenberg. The 8th Virginia was not the only regiment to be recruited largely in the Shenandoah Valley. The 12th Virginia Regiment was also recruited out there and included more soldiers with the last name Height. This is the story of the Bowmans and the Heights in the American Revolutionary War. I hope you enjoy it. This is a historic marker in New York, upstate New York. In the late 1600s, Protestant Germans began to flee the Rhineland of southwestern Germany for multiple reasons, but the simple version is that they were sick and tired of war. Whole towns had been burned and destroyed. And William Penn in particular was very welcoming to them. Queen Anne was very welcoming. She saw herself as a champion of Protestantism in a world infested with hated Catholics. So she was very welcoming to Protestant refugees who were from regions that had been at war with France repeatedly. So there was in about 1708 this gigantic encampment of German speaking, there was no Germany yet. They were from the Palatinate. Literally camped outside of London, and Parliament had a long debate about what to do with them, and they decided, you know what, let's send them to the New World, and they can make pitch tar from pine trees, and we won't have to buy it from the Norwegians anymore if we do that. So they were put on ships and sent to New York, where the experiment was a colossal failure. But this marker is from the place where they were camped for 2 or 3 years, basically indentured servants, uh, uh, tasked with a task that just could not be completed with the resources that were available to them. Among the refugees who lived there were Yost Height and a man named Conrad Weiser. Does anybody know that name at all in this room? I'd be a little surprised. Yeah, I see one person nodding. So he was the grandfather of Peter Muhlenberg. Why don't we click to the next slide? So that is a made-up picture of Conrad Weiser. There are no pictures of him. Nobody knows what he looks like. I'm pretty sure that collar is circa 1820, but that's a picture of him from 100 years before that. He kept a little bit of a diary. So he said he writes from England before traveling across the ocean. In about 2 months, we reached London and England, along with several thousand Germans whom Queen Anne of most glorious memory had taken under her care and was furnishing with food. Then they set sail for the colonies. June 13th, 1710, we came to anchor at New York, here at Livingston, that's Livingston Manor. We were to burn tar and cultivate hemp for the Queen. The Germans, mostly when the project was finally abandoned, most of them went to the Schoharie Valley in further west in New York. That's where the Weisers went. He was pretty young. Yost Height instead went south to Pennsylvania. So let's go to the next slide. And he built part of this house. The right 3 bays, this section, were built by Yost Height in 1718, I believe. The house was later owned by Samuel Pennypacker, who was a governor of Pennsylvania, also of German descent. He added to it. He changed the windows, put on that wraparound porch. The house looks different, but those 3 bays there were built by Yost Height. Yost Height then, as you all know, I'm sure, in about 1731 decided to come down here. I believe the family moved in 1732. Why don't we go to the next slide? And that was the first large big group of German settlers. Still up in Pennsylvania, though, Conrad Weiser moved to Womelsdorf, which is in Berks County, Pennsylvania. It's near the city of Reading. He became a very prominent and very important Indian diplomat. In fact, in New York, when the family was still there, his parents let him go live with the Mohawk Indians for a year as a teenager. So he was fluent in the Indian tongue, comfortable with their culture, and about the same time that Yost Height moved down here, Weiser, who was a little bit younger, served as a translator in one of these big diplomatic treaty negotiations between the Penns and the Pennsylvania Indians. And he spent most of the rest of his life as an Indian diplomat. His house is a state park in Pennsylvania. So why don't we continue? This is a map from my book, and I sat there this morning and very carefully drew this line going down here so you can see the road. This is Route 11 when you get to about here. In Pennsylvania, it's Route 30. I see they use 2 different colors here. Pennypacker Mills is Yost Height's house. Trap is where Henry Muhlenberg lived. I haven't mentioned him yet. He was Peter Muhlenberg's father and Conrad Weiser's son-in-law. He was sent here in 1744 by the Lutheran Church in Germany to organize Lutherans in America. There had been Lutherans here since the colony of New Sweden, but they were not organized. So he was the head of the Lutheran Church in America. So that's where we are by the 1750s or so, right? So I should say that the Heights in 1732, they moved down the wagon road and settled around here, as you know. Peter Muhlenberg doesn't show up until the 1770s, as you know. But Peter grows up here in Trapp. He gets married, but he's the grandson of Conrad Weiser, the son, obviously, of Henry Muhlenberg. He studies in Germany as an apprentice. That does not go well, and he comes back. Here's Dunmore County. That's Shenandoah County now. Frederick County and Berkeley County. That was all Frederick County until 1772. And that year, the Virginia legislature decided that they were going to divide it into 3 different counties. When they did that, remember they had a state church back then, right? The Anglican Church was the Church of Virginia, and you had to have an Anglican parish with an Anglican vestry, and you had to go to an Anglican service at least once a month, everybody, and you had to tithe to the Anglican Church. In other words, pay taxes to the church. So the Frederick vestry divided into 3. So Dunmore County was, the borders of it were exactly the same as Beckford Parish. Frederick's Parish, which is called Frederick Parish, and Berkeley, I think it's Nordborn Parish. But they needed rectors, they needed preachers, Anglican priests. And the Germans who lived here were sort of, do we really have to go to an Anglican church? We're all Lutherans. So James Wood II of Frederick County, a name that may be familiar, he traveled north and met with Henry and said, could we just get Lutherans and Anglicans are not that different, right? Can we just get a Lutheran trained minister to go to London and get ordained and then come be our rector? And then everybody will be happy. He'll speak German. It'll all be great. And Henry says, well, how about my son, Peter? So that's what Peter did. He got on a boat. He went to London. He got ordained. He came back and became the rector of Dunmore Parish. And it was just a matter of time before he was the chairman of the Committee of Correspondence, the chairman of the Committee of Safety, and a member of the House of Burgesses within 3-4 years. Why don't we skip to the next slide? Here's a log house. When the Heights came, this is what they lived in first. In fact, let's skip to the next slide. This house might be familiar to some. As I understand it, and there are experts in this room who might add, subtract, or correct me, but my understanding is that the first floor of this house, the log portion, was built by Yost Height. I saw an estimate that it was 1731, which sounds a year early to me, but I'm not the expert. His son Jacob, if I understand right, added the second floor and built the first part of the stone house, and then where the wood siding is, there was just a breezeway there. So they started as pioneers living in little log houses, and as they succeeded and prospered, they built bigger houses, eventually ones like the one we're in. Let's go to the next one. Does anybody know what that is? So that is the Miller Bible. It's in the Strasbourg Museum. Abraham Bowman is now, okay, so the Yost Height comes, his daughter is married to George Bowman. They have a son named Abraham, and other sons that we're going to hear more about. During not the French and Indian War, but really Pontiac's Rebellion, the Miller family, who lived across the Great Wagon Road, across Route 11 from them, they were attacked by we'll just have to call them a band of outlaws. So it was, the story's in my book if you want to read the whole thing. But it's one white guy named Abraham Mitchell and some natives. They attacked the family as they were sowing flax. They scalped them, they murdered them, except the daughter, who was in her house, sick, unable to help work. She watched the whole thing from her window, traumatized, obviously. And she ran for help, and she found Abraham Bowman, who was a teenage boy, at Fort Bowman, right? As I understand it, he was a little skeptical, but he got on his horse and he rode over there, and he sees that not only is the Miller family all still dying, but the outlaws had taken the family Bible, laid it in the transom of the threshold of the front door, set it on fire, murdered the family cat, and put the cat on top of the Bible. Awful stuff. That's the Bible, and it's in the Strasbourg Museum. So that's an example of the kind of trauma that kids on the frontier suffered growing up. Let's go to the next slide. That's a burned page inside the Bible. It's in German, obviously. Okay, let's go to the next one. Look familiar? I don't need to tell you about that. My understanding is that for a long time we thought that dated to the 1750s, and instead it dates from the 1770s, but there was a log structure there previously. Has there been archaeology on it? Do we know any details about?
There has been over the years, but I don't think we've got don't have much more details.
Yeah, okay. So before the war began, Jacob Height, he got into a big fight with Adam Stephen. That's the Adam Stephen house in Martinsburg. This, by the way, is a waste truck that belonged to Adam Stephen that's in the Smithsonian and the American History Museum. So Jacob Height gets involved in a project to acquire land from the Cherokee Indians in South Carolina. It's not really legal, and it might involve a little bit of alcohol and false promises. He's not the leader of the project, though. Another guy named Richard Pierce is sort of the main guy involved in that project. They get away with it, and Bowman then buys a third of the land that was acquired, technically belonging to Pierce. My interpretation of what happened in that process is that he became over leveraged in order to do that, and became terribly in debt and was unable to pay his bills. Frederick County was divided, and you've got Berkeley County to the north. Adam Stephen was the first sheriff of that county, and the sheriff foreclosed. He came and he said, Jacob, you're not paying your bills. We're going to take all of your livestock, and we're taking all of your enslaved people. And they took them to Martinsburg and put the cattle in a barn, and the slaves in the jail. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is the Frederick County jail door that still exists. This guy, Dan Hendricks, who was reputedly 7 feet tall, went not to this door, but a door that was much like it in Martinsburg with an axe and broke it open to take Jacob's property back. Did the same thing at the barn and was a big hero. He served in the 8th Virginia Regiment, and when the regiment was assigned to Adam Stevens' division, he disappears. He's off the roll like the very next Buster. So let's go to the next one.
Now, where's that door?
That door, I believe, is in the Frederick County Jail now on display.
Courthouse.
Courthouse. Okay. All right. Have you seen it? You know right where it is?
Yeah.
So Jacob, he's still in trouble, and he decides, you know what, I'm out of here. He goes south to live on his land in South Carolina. Well, you remember they cheated the Cherokee of the land? So that was just part of the beginning of what's called the Cherokee War of 1776. The British also ginned up an Cherokee attack down there as part of their original southern strategy, and Jacob was slaughtered in what they call a massacre down there. So we'll hear a little more about Jacob, but that's the end of him. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so now we're in 1775. The Heights and the Bowmans start to explore Kentucky. Some of you know that there was a war called Dunmore's War in 1774. The resolution of that was that Kentucky was open for exploration and settlement. As late as the 1840s, I think, names remained in the bark of beech trees near Bowling Green, Kentucky. And two particular trees next to each other had the names Joseph Neville, Isaac Height, not this Isaac Height, Abraham Bowman, John Bowman, Ephraim and Joseph Drake, and Thomas Slaughter. All of those last names were connected with the 8th Virginia Regiment. Abraham Bowman is the same Abraham Bowman with the Bible story. His older brother, John, stayed in Kentucky and helped write the petition to make Kentucky a county of Virginia. He was the first county lieutenant, in other words, the militia chief of Kentucky County, and an important Western Front soldier. Why don't we go to the next slide?
Is it the Neville? Are you related?
No relation.
Okay.
No relation. Yeah, I get asked that a lot. So these 4 guys, all cousins, they form Height, Bowman and Company in either late 1775 or very, very early 1776. Isaac Height, and he is a cousin of this Isaac Height. He owns 2 shares, and John, Abraham, and Joseph each own 1 share. And I won't get into property laws, but you could acquire a certain amount of land for free if you got to Kentucky early enough, and they took advantage of that, kind of all did it together. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so back in Virginia, Peter Muhlenberg is a delegate to the Virginia Convention. So when they kicked out Lord Dunmore and we were now in a state of rebellion, the House of Burgesses ceases to exist, and the governing body of Virginia is the extra legal Virginia Convention. Peter Muhlenberg is a delegate to it. Jonathan Clark is a delegate to it. Jonathan is the husband of Sarah Height, who lived at Longmeadow, and this Isaac's sister. So that's the what's now called St. John's Church in Richmond. They were there for the Patrick Henry "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech. Why don't we go to the next slide? And so that speech was in the 2nd convention. The 3rd convention authorized the 1st and 2nd Virginia regiments, so they're now raising full-time professional troops. The 4th Virginia Convention in December of 1775 authorizes 7 additional regiments, one of which is designated a German regiment. Right, so you guys know the geography. This is the Blue Ridge. Everything to the west is very different from everything east. Virginia is the most English of English colonies. It is, we already talked about the Anglican Church. Back in the day, they wouldn't allow Quakers, they wouldn't let anybody live with Catholics, nobody. I mean, it was Anglican and very, very English. But on the other side of the Blue Ridge, way back in Governor Spotswood time, they wanted Germans to come down the wagon road to populate the valley. Initially, as a buffer between them and Indian tribes. So now you've got a culturally very different demographic here, and they're not quite sure that they're going to support the revolution, but they figure, yeah, if we make Peter Muhlenberg a colonel, maybe they'll turn out. Well, they make Peter Muhlenberg a colonel. He's from Woodstock. They make Abraham Bowman from Strasburg the lieutenant colonel of the 8th Virginia Regiment, and Peter Helfenstein from Winchester the major. So all 3 field officers are Germans, and they were. That's actually not their job to recruit, but there are 10 companies from these counties, and every company except for this one filled all the way up. They all carried rifles initially, and they were the best equipped, most complete, and best uniformed regiment in the Virginia line, according to Major General Charles Lee. That's Abraham Bowman's signature. So it's Abraham Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, 8th Virginia Regiment. This is Peter Helfenstein. He got malaria and died during the war. He was an immigrant from Germany. Came as a young man with his wife and his baby boy. Let's go to the next one. If they are outlined in white, they are soldiers of the 8th Virginia Regiment. So you got Yost Height, John Height, his granddaughter married this 8th Virginia lieutenant. Mary Height and George Bowman were the parents of not just Abraham Bowman, but Kentucky County Lieutenant John Bowman, Joseph Bowman, Elizabeth Bowman, who we'll talk about later, Captain Isaac Bowman. So lots of Revolutionary War service, and this is only those that are connected somehow to the 8th Virginia Regiment. And we don't need to pause too long. Why don't we go to the next one? Just because it's cool, this is a commission for Leonard Cooper, who was an ensign from Dunmore County. He lost his leg in a duel in 1779 and died. He drowned in the Shenandoah River long after the war because his horse stumbled and he couldn't get out of the water. They were initially, so this is not from the Continental Congress, this is from the Virginia Committee of Safety. So they were initially provincial soldiers. They were not Continental soldiers. They were eventually taken into the Continental lines. So let's go to the next one. I'm not giving our speech really about the 8th Virginia, so I'm not going to give details on their service. But their first main mission was to go all the way south to Charleston. They were at the Battle of Sullivan's Island, a 450-mile hike from Suffolk. I don't know how far it is from here to Suffolk, but, and they were not wearing REI boots like I'm wearing today. And then from there, so they're under the command of Major General Charles Lee, who was a jerk. I'll just leave it at that. He decides, you know what? We're going to go invade Florida. Right. So Florida, East and West Florida were 2 colonies. It's now basically Florida and Alabama, I guess. Florida had become sort of a haven for Tories who had fled the southern states, and they were beginning to organize militarily. So he wanted to go take care of that. So he was going to attack St. Augustine, Florida. And just a little color on Charles Lee. He knew that it had been really trying to get these guys to march this far as provincial soldiers, meaning that their job is to protect Virginia, not South Carolina. It was literally not their job to do what they've been doing. It was an even bigger ask all the way to Florida. So he promised them plunder. Now, this doesn't sound like the Continental Army that we know, right? But he says, we're going to go down there and we're going to sack the town, and all the stuff we steal, you get to keep. Not too great. And the South Carolina government objects, but he does it anyway. And they make it, well, let's go to the next slide. I can't remember. Yeah. So they make it as far as Sunbury. and they've all got malaria.
No.
Half of them have had to stay back in Charleston. Right. And malaria, untreated malaria is nasty stuff. You can build a resistance to it if you grow up in this kind of an area. It was endemic in the South back then. But if you're from, say, the Shenandoah Valley, you have no resistance to it. And William Moultrie said that they were burying 15 soldiers a day at Sunbury. So pretty awful. In December, they get released and they march. This is actually, they go up here to Augusta. That is the terminus of the Great Wagon Road. In other words, that's the end of Route 11. And they were told to march home up all the way up. So let's go to the next one. Okay, finally, they get their Continental Commissions. This one is for Lieutenant Matthias Height, Esquire. I know that we're supposed to say nice things about Heights on this property, but Matthias was a busybody, a drama queen, and evidently a coward too. I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But this is his commission, signed by none other than John Hancock.
Wow.
All right. So, okay, this is, I mentioned Jonathan Clark a little bit earlier. Remember, he married Sarah Height, this Isaac's sister. He kept a diary every day. And each entry says virtually nothing. It says, like right here, clear at Newtown at Mr. Isaac's Heights. At Mr. Isaac Heights, lay ditto. Almost every day, that's what it says. Right? It was raining. I was at Bob's house and I slept at Jim's house. Right? Almost every day. Battle of Brandywine, it says, met the enemy, forced to retreat. I mean, come on, can you give us a little bit more, right? But this has been a great source for me in my book. So he comes back from the South and he's sick with malaria like everybody else. I could show you page after page after page of his diary where he just writes sick, 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 sick. That's with malaria. There's another disease that he had to worry about, smallpox, right? So he comes north, he kind of recuperates at his parents' house in Caroline County. And then he makes his way up here and goes to Isaac Height, Sr. Now, the reason for this, in addition to whatever social connection they might have had, is that back in 1771, Isaac Height had been given a license to do smallpox inoculations. One of two in what was then Frederick County. The other one was Dr. John McDonald. Smallpox inoculation was very controversial, right? It worked. There was like a 4% chance you'd die. It's not bad, right? But it was reasonable for anybody to ask, like, why on earth would we let you intentionally give somebody a highly contagious and lethal disease? That didn't compute for most people. So it was highly controversial. In 1771, the county government gave Isaac Height Sr. and Dr. John McDonald permission to do inoculations for a brief period of time. So Washington, meanwhile, in New Jersey, is inoculating the entire Continental Army because in the invasion of Quebec, and I think secretly they didn't want anybody to know, even here in Virginia, soldiers were dropping like flies from smallpox. So Richard Campbell, who's the captain of the other Dunmore County Company, and Peter Muhlenberg had both written to Jonathan Clark saying, you should get inoculated. Before you go to the Army, get inoculated. Remember, he's already sick with malaria. So he visits Isaac Height. I think he had a crush on his daughter, who I think was 16. And he's like 22 or 23. But I think he also wants advice from Mr. Height on whether or not to get inoculated. I think it would be on the next page. He then goes up to Winchester. Dr. McDonald gives him the inoculation, which means they cut you on the top of your hand and they go over to Jim here, who's got smallpox. You squeeze one of the pustules and you put the goop in this guy's hand, put a bandage on it. 10 days later, you get sick, but not as sick as you would have if you got it naturally. And 96% of the time you survive. By the way, the guy that he got the pustule out of, he died, and he was a lieutenant in the 8th Virginia Regiment. So Jonathan's got live smallpox in him, and he gets back on his horse and he rides back to visit the Heights for a couple more days. And then he goes to Woodstock to attend the county supervisors meeting, right? And then he rides back up to Winchester, and he goes to see the remains of Fort Loudon, which is still there, but it's kind of crumbling, and does some other stuff. But then, he knows he's only got about a week that he can do this stuff before he's symptomatic. And then he goes back to Dr. McDonald's and goes through the whole process, and he's inoculated. Let's go to the next one. So that's the Height House. That's Long Meadow, but that's the 2.0. It was called Traveler's Rest. Previously, it was a log house. That's what Jonathan Clark would have visited. I think I read on the National Park Service website that this house is built on the same foundation as the log house. But
the original house burned, and they think it burned, and then they rebuilt on the existing foundation.
okay, yeah, good to know. That's cool. So these rocks down here presumably are original. Okay, so let's go to the next one. That's smallpox. I won't make you look at that for too long. Let's go to the next one. So now it's 1777. The enlisted guys have marched to Philadelphia, where they get inoculated. Jonathan Clark's been inoculated here. Others have been as well. And Virginia has authorized additional regiments. So this is not the 8th Virginia. These are the counties that the 12th Virginia Regiment was recruited. It's very similar to the territory that the 8th Virginia Regiment came from. Abraham Height was the lieutenant of Jonathan Langdon's company, raised in Dunmore County, of the 12th Virginia Regiment. So that's another Continental officer from this area. So why don't we go to the next one? So they march, they congregate in Winchester, and they march east up the wagon road to Philadelphia, and then to New Jersey, and they are assigned to Charles Scott's brigade along with the 8th Virginia. So you got the 4th, 8th, 12th Virginia, and then these two additional regiments that are not state regiments. They're authorized directly from Congress, and they're put in Adam Stevens' division. So it was at this moment that the guy who busted open the jail door is out of Dodge, because Adam Stevens and he are enemies, along with the Height family. I think it's pretty clear that the Heights were out to get Stephen, and he, I think, kind of deserved it. Why don't we go to the next one? Okay, so skipping past a whole bunch of stuff, they're at the Battle of Kuchar's Bridge, they're at the Battle of Brandywine. Now we're at the Battle of Germantown. So Philadelphia is down here. This is Germantown here. They actually go past the house that Yost Height built in Pennsylvania, and they camp there for a night. It's kind of cool. I don't think Abraham Bowman even knew that it was his grandfather's house. And then they march down this road, and they attack, and bad stuff starts to happen. So I'll make this as simple as possible. There are all kinds of reasons this battle went wrong. There was fog, there was smoke they couldn't see. They were in 4 different divisions, and they had to synchronize, and they didn't have radios to do it with. Some of you probably know about the Chew House, where Henry Knox talks Washington into cannonading this thick stone house, and it doesn't work. That distracts everybody's attention. But here on the left side of the line, you've got one division attacking down here. Can't really see them. This is Greene's division, which was the simple version is that Congress wouldn't let Washington have lieutenant generals. So when he is attacking, he doesn't have wing commanders. He has to elevate a major general to act as a lieutenant general. And in this case, that's Nathaniel Greene, who left his division to do that. Peter Muhlenberg is brought from his brigade to command the division. And then a colonel is pulled from his regiment to command the brigade. right? So everybody's under officers they're not used to. The officers are playing roles that they're not used to, and it creates a mess. Adam Stephen and Peter Muhlenberg are commanding these two divisions. Stephen has been a major general for quite some time. Peter Muhlenberg is not a major general. He's only pretending. So Stephen decides, well, that means I'm the smart one and I'm going to start bossing him around. And I'm going to start bossing around his soldiers, breaking chain of command, right? He orders the 9th Virginia to attack down here, decides that, and they're not under his command. And then he decides that's not enough guys, so I'm going to send the 8th Virginia down. They're under the command of this guy, John Markham, who just became a lieutenant colonel. Abraham Bowman is sick and not in command that day. Markham says, I'm not doing it. And then, so the major, a guy named William Dark, who's from Berkeley, he says, well, then I'll go, right? And they go down here and they capture a bunch of guys. These guys all wander around and get lost. And these guys all get locked up for 3 years in terrible British prisons. So it was a mess. And at least this part of what went wrong that day was Adam Stevens' fault. Now, remember, all the Heights that are throughout the 8th Virginia Regiment and the 12th Virginia Regiment, they already don't like Adam Stephen because of what he did to Jacob. Stevens also just, like, he's a jerk. I mean, it's really that simple. And he's giving orders to, not to Muhlenberg, but to Muhlenberg's soldiers who were supposed to report to Muhlenberg. And he gets court-martialed and fired. And Washington signs Washington had enough of him as well. So let's go to the next one. So this is just the lower part of the battle. This is where they got captured. So next one, please. Then they go to Valley Forge. The 8th Virginia has shrunk from malaria and desertion and death and whatever. The 2-year enlistments that the enlisted men signed up for in the spring of 76 expire early in 78. So it's now just a tiny little regiment. And so it and the 4th Regiment and the 12th Regiment are combined provisionally into what they literally called the 4th, 8th, 12th Regiment. The consequence of that is that Abraham Bowman's no longer needed. He's what they call a supernumerary officer. So he's let go and he goes home. So let's go to the next slide. So you remember Height Bowman and Company? How Isaac Height, the cousin, and 3 of the Bowman boys, they had acquired land here along the Dix River in Kentucky. And they each had, I think it's 1,400 acres each, but they were all next to each other. And Bowman led really like a wagon train, but it was a pack horse train of settlers from Strasburg down to the Cumberland Gap and up the Warriors Path to Fort Bowman in the winter of 1779, 1780. By, according to authorities, the coldest winter ever in America. The Chesapeake Bay froze over. And it was awful, but most of them survived. But so that's where Bowman is. His brother, John Bowman, is out here as the county lieutenant already. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is the Bowman Memorial Gate in Harrodsburg, which is very clear. You probably saw it next to Fort Bowman Station. I think I'm going to show you a close-up of this plaque. This is for the Bowman brothers. Over here, if you can see that, it says in memory of Height-Bowman. So that's recognition that the Heights were an important part of this as well. Harrodsburg is the original settlement in Kentucky. So let's go to the next slide. So that's a close-up of that plaque. So Abraham, we've already talked about. John, we've already talked about. Major Joseph Bowman, another brother, he was second in command of George Rogers Clark in the expedition to take Vincennes. Were it not for him, Ohio would be part of Canada right now, arguably. He died just after the victory at Vincennes when a cannon exploded. And then Captain Isaac Bowman, the younger brother there, he was captured by the Chickasaw Indians. They were going to burn him at the stake. They had stripped him naked and tied him to a pole. And then one of the Indian women said, yeah, you know what? I think I want to adopt him. So he lived for 3 years as a Chickasaw. There's a whole sort of cultural context to that I could explain, but we don't have time. If you want to ask me about it afterwards, I'm happy to explain. Let's go to the next one. Now, there's also a daughter. So those four Bowman brothers have a sister, Elizabeth. She moved to Kentucky in, not on my authority, but as I read last night, I think 1777. So that's pretty early, with her husband, Isaac Ruddle, who was also from here. Um, they, in 1780, I should explain. So the British out of Fort Detroit, now the city of Detroit, they were arming Indian warriors to attack into Kentucky and sending them down, sometimes even with cannons. In one of those raids, Isaac and Elizabeth and their 5 children were captured and forced marched to the north, all the way to Detroit. Their baby was burned to death. I don't know about 2 of the other kids, but Stephen Ruddle and Abraham Ruddle, if I remember right, 4 years old and 8 years old. I'm not certain about that. They were, again, adopted by the Shawnee, and believe it or not, raised with Tecumseh, the famous Tecumseh. Like, he was their brother, and fought in battles with him against Anthony Wayne in 1794. Pretty crazy. Isaac and Elizabeth are forced marched all the way to Montreal. Um, uh, and yeah, I won't go off on a tangent on that. But Stephen, they are let go at the end of the war. Actually, a little bit before the end of the war, I think in 1782. These guys, especially Abraham, he can't even remember not being an Indian, right? So they stay with the Shawnee until after the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So this is when Anthony Wayne finally beats Tecumseh in 1793. Part of the treaty that follows that was, okay, you have to give all your captured white people back, including these 2. Right. So there's an officer who writes this account that he was at this event where they're, bringing back these children or former children who had been captured, many of whom don't want to leave because they can't remember anything else. And he finds this Stephen. He goes up to Stephen and says, I'm looking for a kid named Stephen Ruddle. Do you know Stephen? And he like beats himself on the chest and says, me, Stephen Ruddle. Abraham didn't even speak English, not a word. But they were taken home. So let's go to the next slide. That is Abraham Ruddle's grave and his wife in Arkansas. As I understand it, he never quite fit in with European society the rest of his life. Next slide. Okay, there's a familiar face. So a couple more Heights who served in the Revolution. Lieutenant George Height. He served with Light Horse Harry Lee in Lee's Legion late in the war in the Southern campaign with Nathaniel Greene. He was wounded at the Battle of 96 in South Carolina. And when Jefferson County was carved out of Berkeley County, he was the first county clerk. Other than that, I don't know anything. Isaac Height, I hesitate to say a word about him in this room. Anybody want to take over the presentation? So he was an aide-de-camp to General Muhlenberg starting in 1780. I've been told that his name appears on an 8th Virginia roster in 1780. Now, it's complicated. The line was consolidated. So the 8th Virginia was now the 4th Virginia, and the 12th Virginia was now the 8th Virginia. So he may have appeared on what was originally a 12th Virginia roster briefly. That may have just been for paperwork reasons. I think he never actually served in that regiment. Peter Muhlenberg evidently just picked him to be his aide-de-camp, which means that he was at Yorktown. If you read the first biography of Peter Muhlenberg, the author, who not coincidentally was Peter Muhlenberg's great nephew, claims that Alexander Hamilton stole all the credit for Yorktown. And Isaac Height would have been in the thick of that too. I'm not an expert on Yorktown, but as I understand it, Peter Muhlenberg was in charge of the attack on Redoubt number 10. In charge, right? Hamilton is like actually leading the charge. Peter Muhlenberg's close enough to get wounded, not seriously, but he's like shot in the hand or something. And he's off getting medical attention. So it's Hamilton who sends the report to Washington, and that becomes the letter of record. So Muhlenberg's role in the attack on Redoubt 10 at Yorktown might get short shrift. It's not clear. So let's go to the next one. All right, so back in Kentucky, Abraham Bowman, John Bowman dies in 1784 of kidney disease. About the same time, Abraham Bowman moves up to Lexington, Kentucky, or just outside of Lexington, and he builds this house. So this is a log cabin, or actually technically a log house because it's more than one floor, but it's like the fanciest, it's like a double wide, right? So it has a basement. Log houses don't normally have basements. It's got a second floor and an exterior staircase that goes up. So it's pretty sweet. Now, I got to tell you briefly how I found this. I knew it existed, and there were pictures from the National Register of Historic Places from the 70s, and it was a dump. I mean, it was falling to pieces. So I tried to figure out where it was, and I figured out what road it was on, and I figured out what farms are on there, and I sort of did a bunch of detective work to find out where it was. And I found an email address and I sent it, and I heard nothing for 3 months. And then I get this email back saying, "We understand that you'd like to come visit the Bowman cabin." I said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to be out there. I'll come." And I took my family when the eclipse happened, where Kentucky was the best viewing. So we get there, and it turns out that the property is in the middle of like the fanciest of all fancy horse country. And the property is owned by the Emir of Dubai. And he has restored it, which is why the stairwell and all this stuff looks perfect. But this stuff is original. Part of the property is now the Keeneland Raceway, if you're into horse racing. So that's a pretty cool thing. That was his first house. There's a second house he lived in, and then let's go to the next one. He either built that right before he died, or his son built it right after he died. But they obviously did well, right? And they practiced slavery. Let's go to the next slide. So in 1824 and 1825, President Madison invited the Marquis de Lafayette to come for the United States to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Revolution. Congress got him this carriage. It has been restored, but the restorers did not realize, well, they weren't sure that this kind of stuff was original. So they left the black lacquer. The rest of it should come off, because that is what it looked like with the golden grain. And he traveled through, I think it was all 24 states at the time, for 2 years. When he arrived in Lexington, he was sitting in there, and Abraham Bowman was sitting in there, and they rode into Lexington, and Kentucky's full of veterans from the war. They were rewarded. They never got paid, but they were given land. So Kentucky is Revolutionary War veteran country. Lexington is just mobbed with people. Every window, every square inch of sidewalk. Veterans rushing up to show like they're missing limbs and fingers. Bowman's like the guy. He's 75 years old, I think. He sat next to the Marquis at a banquet that served 1,400 people, if I remember that right. So it was a big event. And the carriage still survives, which is very cool. What's next? Okay, that's it. There might be other Heights, there might be other Bowmans who were in the war, but I don't know who they are. So that's what I have to share. Thank you all. Good.
I mentioned when you showed the jail gate, it is actually in the Winchester, Frederick County Joint Judicial Center.
Okay.
The old courthouse is a museum, but it's not in there. It's in
Okay.
the new court.
I'd love to go see it, even though it's not the door that, what was his name? Dan Hendricks broke. That one, I guess, is splinters somewhere, right? So if you want to learn more, I have a website, 8thVirginiaRegiment.com. That's specifically about the 8th Virginia. I think there's one more slide. I have a new website, and this is Virginia. I've sort of widened the aperture now that my book's done, and it's all of Virginia. So can I answer any questions? Does anybody have one? What, did I get anything wrong about the Height family? That's my biggest fear. Yes, sir.
The Muhlenbergs,
Yes.
a very interesting family.
Yeah.
Peter Muhlenberg's brothers. Can you elucidate?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Their achievements?
So, so there was, he had two brothers. He was the oldest. The three of them were sent to Germany in 1764-ish. The other brothers went to the University of Halle, which was the big Lutheran university, to train for the ministry. Peter wanted to go into business. So he got an apprenticeship with a shopkeeper. And it turns out that he would only let him run that era's version of a cash register and nothing else. So he got really upset, and he actually joined a British regiment that was recruiting in Germany. Remember the king of, the House of Hanover, they were German, they ruled both places. So all three of them ended up going to the ministry. Peter was never a Lutheran, an ordained Lutheran minister. People think they had two ordinations. It's not true. His first ordination was in London. But his brothers got ordained. And one of them became the first speaker of the House of Representatives, Frederick Muhlenberg. There's a fun letter where he's tisking at his brother for being a soldier and a pastor at the same time. And then the Gotthilf was also a pastor, also the first president of Franklin College, which is now my alma mater, Franklin and Marshall College, and a famous botanist. So Peter went on to serve in Congress, both in the House and the Senate. He was also the vice president of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania. Under its revolutionary constitution, there was no governor, they had a council. Ben Franklin was the president of it, but he was 80-some years old and busy doing things like writing the Constitution. So Peter ran the show. Any other questions?
The house that you showed early on, where you said you thought that Yost had built the core
Yes.
log structure, is that in Maytown?
Yes. I should have said more about it. So in addition to it being Jacob House, well, I guess originally Yost Height's house, if that part's accurate. That's in the paperwork for the historic registry. And then Jacob Height's house. In 1773, Horatio Gates, who lived up there, gets a letter from Charles Lee and says, hey, you should come live here. There's property available. So one day, Charles Lee shows up on his doorstep and he says, yeah, Jacob Height, we just took his property away because he wasn't paying his debts. You could buy that house cheap. So Major General Charles Lee, the invader of Florida, bought that house. And he went kind of nuts.
Called it Height Town.
Prato Rio was the house's name, but Leetown is the area. Yeah. So, anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about the Native women adopting children and adopting people?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm not an expert on this, but I know enough to be dangerous. So, if you don't mind me being dangerous, I'll share that much. It's very hard to generalize about natives because there were different tribes and there were different what we now call phratries, or like clans within a tribe, and of course individuals of different personalities, right? So you can't really generalize too much. But there was this practice that is now called mourning wars, MOURNI, like sadness, mourning wars. If you're in battle and somebody dies and the enemy kills one of your people, the practice then is you go get one of their people to take that person's place, usually a kid, right? In war generally, to prove your valiance, you need to come home either having killed somebody with a scalp or with a captive. If you don't have one of those three things, you didn't perform well, right? They practiced ritualistic torture, and there are very detailed descriptions of this that will make your skin crawl. Just absolutely horrific. Um, but they also would adopt, right? So, and very often it was kids, and there were kids from around here that were grabbed in the 1760s. So you would become a full member of the tribe. And of course, if you were a little kid, you wouldn't remember anything else after eventually. And there at the Battle of Point Pleasant during Dunmore's War, there are as many as 4 or 5 Indian warriors who had white skin on the other side. And one of them was identified as the brother of the guy on the other side. So it's pretty crazy stuff. The cultures did blend, right? Even like clothing, like the fringed hunting shirt, that comes from native culture. So they rub shoulders more than we think of. And but yeah, there was a lot of that forcible adoption.
So the woman named Abba was an enslaved woman owned by Jacob Hyde. And so after that massacre, she was with the Cherokee people, but we don't know the nature of that relationship. We don't think Cherokee were enslaving her,
Mhm.
or it was like you say, where they brought her into their culture.
Yeah.
But eventually Jacob Hyde's son, George, comes back to South Carolina to reclaim his family's property and reclaims and brings her back to first Berkeley County, and then he trades with his cousin Isaac Hyde Jr. here.
Yeah, one of the things I like to say, and I'll say it now, is history was just as complicated as the present is now, right? I mean, the Cherokee practiced slavery right up to the Civil War. There was a Confederate general who was a Cherokee. So it's past is a mess, but so's the president, so they shouldn't feel too bad. Can anybody else ask me a question, or are we good? Yeah.
So Stephen, is that Stephen City up north here? Or is that?
No, and I can't remember, but I think that is another son-in-law of Yost Hyde, but I don't remember exactly. But Adam Stephen was the founder of Martinsburg.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think he named it after a friend or something because Stephen City already had his name.
I think there was another Stephen City. I think they call it Newtown. I think
Stephen's married, one of the Hyde girls. Yeah, I think it might have been Joyce Hyde's daughter. I'm not sure about the time.
Yeah,
But that Stevens did marry into the Hyde family.
okay. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a genealogist and I don't want to pretend to be, but
And Isaac Bowman,
Yeah.
after he was captured by the Chickasaw, it took him 2 or 3 years to get back home.
mhm.
He made his way away from the Chickasaw to New Orleans, where he boarded a ship.
Yeah,
Had to go to Cuba,
right.
so he's at
Mhm.
Cuba. And then I think he made it to Philadelphia, and then on foot, made it back to Cedar Creek.
Yeah, the other Isaac Height, the one that went to Kentucky, he was killed by, I think, the Shawnee.
But those 4 boys were the Centaurs of Cedar Creek.
Right. It's an awesome name.